Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guildhouse. This is a weekly podcast where I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop and RPG space. And this week, I'm joined by Blaise Wigglesworth. Hello.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Not too shabby, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I must admit, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm so used to the sort of the cadence and the flow of words that I introduce the podcast with that it's, again, I don't know if I need to start sort of shaking it up or if people are going to miss the sort of the bog standard routine that I've done, 50 something times now.
Go with what works.
Yeah,
right?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And,
Yep.
I'm sure maybe in another 50 episodes when I can repeat it in my sleep, maybe then I'll have to.
Yeah, that's fair.
But podcast introductions aside, kind of for the people listening then, what sort of things have you been publishing on the DMsGuild? What might they have seen of yours?
I guess the kind of three things that might have been seen is I did a story called The Chronicles of Sorrow. That was a first level adventure. That was my first foray into the DMsGuild. But more recently, I've been doing solo adventures. So I did a shipwrecked series. It's a trilogy of 3, obviously, about being shipwrecked on island in the South Seas and trying to basically puzzle your way out and slowly but surely become a hero among those people of the South Sea Islands. And another one is the attack on Avernus, which is a high tier, like tier 4 adventure. That came out, I think last summer or maybe 2 years ago. I can't remember. No, it was last summer. Yeah. And a lot of people have been picking that one up. So those are the big 3, I think.
Yeah, no, and in fairness, it's quite a quite a range, because normally when people kind of dip their toes into writing adventures and stuff like that, it typically sometimes is like some combination of one shots. But
Right.
To go in with trilogies, and then again, I'm more impressed by going on any sort of content for tier 4.
Right.
Which is I actually, you know what, I'm going to kick that off. I think that's a good place to start. So with
Sure.
Attack on Avernus, then, how do you navigate writing tier 4 exactly?
That's a great question. So it's one of those weird things where you have to really manage expectations, because there are some people who are optimized builds all the time. And so if you are not challenging enough at tier 4, they're just going to walk through. On the other hand, if you are too challenging, you're going to take the kind of the adventure-oriented player and just kind of crush them. So what I had to do was offer 2 versions of the game in the product itself. So each encounter has standard mode and infernal mode.
I like the word. I like the verbiage.
So the DM, if they find that they're walking through this encounter, the next encounter, they just dial it up to infernal mode. All the stats are there, and it's a very simple switch. The monsters are almost always the same. There just happens to be more of them, right? There might be something that in a previous part of the game would be just an object, but in this one, when you touch it, there's an effect.
Yeah.
So being able to dial it back and forth based on the DM's feeling for how the high tier players are doing, I think was kind of crucial.
Yeah, and I think I must admit, one of the things that I've kind of picked up, and I can't remember where I heard it exactly, but it's the idea that like the like gut reaction for writing tier 4 is to try and implement restrictions.
Right.
To be like, this is a no fly, anti-magic field of the fat. And from a designer, it's nice because then you can kind of plan for every. But one of I guess the allure of high tier play, especially for like one shots or those sort of things, is people want to do their cool stuff. And
Absolutely.
If on the first encounter the bard wants to throw a wish in the mix, then that's one less resource that they have towards the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think the idea of like an infernal mode is I think that's a kind of a clever addition. But I suppose it kind of inadvertently doubles, well, not necessarily doubles the workload, but I suppose you have to think of every encounter twice.
Yeah, you do. You have to do the reading as the DM, and at a high tier like that, I think most DMs are going to go, all right, I've got to have a plan B here.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you that it can be a little bit more taxing, but at the same time, it gives you that flexibility. So you avoid a moment of disappointment, or that you crush them and you're like, oh God, I did not want to do that. So being able to dial it back a little bit, I think it's worth the prep. But your point is well taken.
And then I guess on the other side of things, and in writing, I guess a kind of trilogy of adventures.
Yeah.
What were some of the design challenges you kind of found with that?
Wow, it was pretty funny. I initially didn't intend to do a trilogy. It started off actually during the first COVID lockdown.
Oh, wow.
I was going nowhere. No one was going anywhere. And I said, well, no one's playing with their friends. I sure didn't know how to do online versions of the game at that point. I wasn't that tech savvy. So I said, okay, I'm going to play some solo adventures for fun. I went out, played a couple, and was blown away. I just had such a great time. And almost the next day after finishing my first solo, I'm like, I'm doing this. I'm going to write a solo. And I threw myself into it, and I enjoyed it so much, and it got such a good reception. I'm like, well, I'd be crazy not to do another one. Yeah. And this process just repeated itself. I think I wrote all 3 in under a month.
Wow.
And yeah, it blew my mind. And yeah, go ahead.
I guess then, so do you think that's like a product of writing the sort of like the solo adventure format kind of lends itself, or was it the case of just the spur of the inspiration, sort of burning the midnight oil?
You know what? It's both. I think the solo style that I do is actually inspired by The Executioner's Daughter by Ashley Warren. Yeah, very much so. So what in her particular style that she did, you would have a success or a failure column instead of what we typically think of as a solo adventure, where there's 500 little paragraphs, and you go, if you did this, go to paragraph 77, and you just flip back and forth through the text. Hers is much more linear, and so the narrative style that she did really allows for someone who loves to write to just write. It's not as complex. There's not a huge flow chart of left or right, up or down, and all that stuff. Now, that being said, being locked up during COVID was definitely an inspiration. I'm like, I've got to do something with my time. I'm going bananas up here.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. So there's a perfect storm.
No, I'm sorry. The fact, I hadn't even considered the fact that a trilogy of kind of solo adventures. Well, no, it feels weird. It feels like, again, the sort of adventure you write is kind of almost like the other side of adventure writing that I've never really explored. So right. It's kind of fascinating to kind of like, I guess, it kind of like pick your brain to kind of find a little bit more about that process. No, again, hearing the sort of like success and failure sort of way of sort of, I guess, tapering what essentially could be, I guess, in a solo adventure, you don't want to become the DM yourself as well.
Right. That's the trick. And this is where solo design is so tricky, because you have to really consider, as we were mentioning before, all the different possibilities, right? When I first wrote the solo adventures, turtles weren't really a thing. They weren't really a character class per se, or they weren't popular. And I guess they were. They just weren't on my radar. Yeah. And when there's a nautical theme adventure and you have somebody who can swim and hold their breath, it changes everything. And so being able to put in some minor restrictions, like saying turtles might not be the best for this encounter, for this, that's okay. I mean, as long as you give people a heads up, right? I think that's kind of crucial, and that's something I'm going to have to do as I move forward, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, the actual combats, I find they actually become really boring if you're not careful, and I'm leaning a particular way in my design now, where like a solo combat often begins with, you're on this side of the map, the bad guy's over there, you rush toward each other, and there's 3 rounds of hitting each other.
Yep.
Right. And it's a dog pile, right? So what I'm trying to do in another solo that I'm writing now is have every battlefield be interactive. Yeah. So there's at least one thing on the battlefield that you can do other than attack that will create distance between yourself and your opponent, right? So that, like, for example, you pull down a large canvas and it flops over a cultist. Yeah. You have an extra round to do something while they're struggling. And that kind of interactivity with the environment, I think, is actually really crucial for solo adventures, to give it that, to avoid that just head-to-head combat that can be a bit tedious.
I guess, did you think it varies somewhat depending on, like, obviously in a martial class, it kind of makes most sense to kind of close that distance of that. Do you think it kind of, again, it's slightly more interactive for the more sort of like range focused classes?
At higher levels, I think you're going to be okay, but at low levels, you're right. You're a caster. You can't fly. right? You can fire off a magic missile. Great. That's not going to drop him. So he'll be there in a round, right? So there it is. I mean, putting little difficult terrain between you and the opponent could be enough at a low level that keeps them just at bay so that you can use your panoply of tricks there before they're up in your face again.
I must admit, this is, again, it's so interesting to try and tackle, I guess, these design challenges that only necessarily apply in the sort of the solo adventure sphere.
It's true, yeah.
Which, again, solo adventure sphere sounds like that sounds like a cool area to play around with.
That's great.
But no, again, you touched on some really good points. Like, first and foremost, obviously, the way you sort of balance the flow of it to kind of success and failures, inspired kind of by Ashley. I'm curious. So I know that, what was it? So Anthony Joyce did the kind of Blood Hunter solo adventure, which again kind of it was designed from a particular class in mind. Yes. Is that something you've kind of maybe thought about exploring in like a further adventure, or do you kind of like the openness to kind of let players bring whatever non-tortle character to the table?
I'm surprised you asked, because one of the projects I'm doing right now is a solo class.
Hey.
Yeah, so it's not the Blood Hunter. It's called the Solitaire, and it is it's kind of a jack of all trades class, designed specifically for solving solo adventure problems. So it isn't that you can do everything. You can do a lot of things well, but some of your abilities create space, right? Some of your abilities give you unusual forms of movement. Yeah. And this, if you take this kind of Swiss Army knife into a solo adventure, you're going to open up a lot more options, and you're going to have a lot of more dynamic combat. Yeah. And that's something it's presently being play tested, and I've got some good feedback, and I've got some reviews like, dude, why did you do this? So right now there's a lot of work to still be done, but we're getting close. No,
fantastic. And I must admit, I think some of the things that necessarily kind of apply to more generally at like any sort of ventures is when you have like, I guess, combat focused encounters, thinking about, what's the most you can kind of make of that situation to try and give people things to kind of interact with and hope, whether it is just like, I don't know. I've always been tempted, and sometimes, like, I don't know why, players always find themselves fighting around altars.
Yes, yeah.
And I've yet to have a player thinking, you know what, this might be a good time to pray in the middle of, but 1 in 10, maybe they do. And that's where you can kind of involve some sort of cool blessings and I mean, failing that, you just throw in a chandelier, and then that's kind of...
That's right, yeah, exactly.
No, interesting. And again, thank you so much for letting have like a deep dive into like, again, these sort of differing design problems kind of tackled.
It's my pleasure.
I guess I'm curious then, so across everything that you kind of write then, what is your creative process? Like, where do the ideas kind of come from?
Yeah, almost every time I get in the mood to do something creative, it's almost always after a game session where I saw a problem, right? Where I was playing and I was like, this is really fun, but I wish this happened, and it didn't happen, and there's no way for it to happen. And then I'll kind of sit down after the game and say, how could this actually have occurred in the game? If my DM had the right tool, could they have used it to get me more immersed in the game, or whatever the case may be? So that's almost always where it starts, is there's some kind of problem that needs to be solved. And then I just sit down and I start fiddling around.
Interesting. And so I imagine, so again, obviously Shipwrecked was a case of like, I'm in lockdown. I've been playing some solo adventures. I kind of want to, was there again, for any of your other products, was there any, can you remember sort of what the impetus was exactly?
Sure. Let's see. With the Attack on Avernus, there had never been a game that I was aware of that allowed for a dungeon where you're falling. Because in the particular case, the design of the Attack on Avernus is you go into a 100-mile long tube that binds the prime material plane to another plane that cannot be accessed through teleportation. You have to go through this tube. Mm-hmm. And what happens is once you enter the tube, gravity changes and you start falling. And that was just something I always wanted to try, is have a game that operates in 3 dimensions, so that, most games when you're having a combat, mm-hmm. you're going across a 2-dimensional plane. Yeah. Right. And yes, you can climb, but it's kind of a throwaway. Having yourself be on a flying mount, which is what happens in this particular game, and being able to swoop down and then rise back up and attack from behind, and having that full immersion 3D experience was something I just wanted so badly as a player.
Yeah.
I said, I got to do this. Like, I want to have this experience. So then we just cooked it up.
Yeah. No, I must admit, yeah. What was that? So funny enough, again, I don't know how it happened. Sometimes with guests and stuff like that, I did some of the maps on that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's right. You did.
Yeah. It's
Bingo.
Small world and stuff like that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And I suppose the difficulty that you can't necessarily portray in a 2D map is the sort of depth of it, or I guess depth and height,
right,
and stuff like that. And I kind of always like, I guess the way I would run it is, if anything, you would just like, was it each player token just has like a note in the corner, just keeping an eye on, like, you are 50 foot up, you are like, 30 foot up down.
Yeah, so in that particular case, that's exactly what I would suggest. But the other thing I would suggest is, at the beginning of the encounter, the DM creates a reference disk of 0.
Okay.
Right? That way you say, okay, you're -5, reference to 0. Yeah. And that way you can go beyond the 0 plane and below the 0 plane, and you can still basically have those numbers telling you where you really are in 3 dimensions.
See, I must admit, this is more of like a personal anecdote, but I have only really had bad encounters with flying in D&D.
Yeah, that's
just because the moment you start flying, you're going to be falling. I don't know.
Yes.
I've even as a DM, there's been a few times where a player's like, I'm going to start flying, and I'm like, okay, by all means, and then next thing you know, they're falling.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. Just to that point, in the particular game, the attack on Avernus, your mount and you are bound by a halo. So once you mount the creature, its halo goes to you. Yeah. So if you do fall off, it can teleport to you instantly. Yeah. So it solves that problem of, okay, now you're falling at the speed of gravity, you're going to die pretty soon.
Yeah, no, I must admit, there's always there's some cases and stuff like that. I imagine that 4th tier, like, what is it? So it's 1d6 per 10 foot falling.
Right.
I imagine there is a point where it's just like,
you're done.
Or no, or more the opposite of, like, I've fallen 100 feet and that's fine.
That's true.
I mean, true. There's liches out there who like do blights and stuff like that. I've like falling 100 feet out of, like, that's how I wake up in the morning.
That's true. That is a good point. Yeah.
It kind of, yeah, it's interesting. And I guess then kind of leading into that then is tackling these design challenges, or like, going away from your table thinking like, okay, well, this is something I want to, would you say that's your favorite part of the project? Or
yeah, absolutely. Once you get that idea stuck in your head, speaking for myself, I sometimes can't go to sleep, right? I'm thinking about it going, there's got to be a way to make this work. There's got to be a way to make this fun. And once I get out of bed and I start typing, just watching it come to life, and that kind of excitement of seeing your vision taking a very crude but very tangible shape is amazing. It's just so exciting.
Oh, okay. So I've got a good question then. So just because I'm always curious, with an adventure then, where do you start?
Mm-hmm. In the case of, let's take Attack on Avernus for a minute. I started with the problem. The problem was I wanted a flying 3-dimensional combat.
Yeah.
And so from there I said, okay, I want it to be high tier. I want it to be a descent into hell. That was always something that was on my mind from previous games. And so once you took all that, you just kind of go with it, right? I mean, that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. I guess like you look at, like, oh yeah, what's going on in hell at the moment? And he's like, oh well, Tiamat's in hell.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do that. Let's deal with Tiamat and her flunkies.
Yeah. No, exactly. I must admit, I've been the whole I don't know why, but I've always felt at least with Avernus and stuff like that, Tiamat just being in Avernus always felt like a little bit of an add-on.
Yeah.
It's just, there's so much going on. There's the interplay between like Zariel and Belle. Yes. There's and Tiamat.
Just hanging out. Yeah. It's funny because one of the weird things is I think her alignment is chaotic evil too, and we tend to think of hell as being lawful evil. So your point is well made. Like, there's something it felt like they just kind of threw in there, like you said. It's a little off, but whatever.
So I think basically, I don't know why, but I do know why. But I've been doing some lore involving Tiamat recently.
Yes.
And basically, I think it involves that I think Tiamat was killed or slain,
Yes.
and ended up being returned to hell. And then she kind of swore servitude to Asmodeus as like a champion.
Right.
And I think it's the case of like Asmodeus was like, you can rule Avernus if you want, and Tiamat was like, no, I don't want to anger Bel.
Yeah.
And then Tiamat was like, I can help Zariel stay in charge. And then Asmodeus was like, okay, I'm going to also tell Bel to keep you in charge. So it's like a weird trifecta where everyone's being played by each other. It's
Machiavellian style politics of hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
It's schemes within schemes. It's a lot of like moving parts. But yeah, no, again, it's just nice. I think, I think every plane of existence needs like a 5-headed
guardian.
Yeah.
I agree. Why not?
So I don't actually know this. So there's Tiamat, and then obviously her brother is Bahamut.
Yes, yeah.
Does Bahamut have 5 heads?
No, Bahamut doesn't. I think Bahamut only has 1 head, and weirdly, I mean, this is here's some random stuff for you. This is all Mesopotamian mythology, right?
Oh.
So Tiamat and Bahamut were the 2 dragons, one of freshwater and one of saltwater. I won't bore you with this for long, I promise.
No, by me, I do. I'm learning.
All right, and they were split, one from the other, by a warrior named Marduk. And so what we have is Tiamat was cast into the seas, and Bahamut was the freshwater dragon, who's the good dragon because it's most productive for life. Anyhow, so there's all this stuff is kind of built into their antagonistic relationship in the D&D world, I guess.
I don't know. I just feel like if you have the opportunity to have a 5-headed dragon,
why blow it?
Yeah, why blow it to 5? Maybe that's a party trick of Bahamut's, like occasionally you just split.
Didn't see this one coming. You know what? That actually would be cool. Like having all 5 metallic heads, right? Like why not?
Yeah.
No, it's a good call.
He's missing out. Like again, there's endless possibilities. If not the haunting speaking with 5 voices in unison.
That's true.
Which again, no amount of voice acting I think can kind of prepare you for. No, again, thank you for indulging my Tiamat and Bahamut.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
On the other side of the coin, then, so if we have your Bahamut being the tackling design challenges, what is your Tiamat? What is your least favorite part?
Oh, editing is the brutal part. I have the utmost respect for editors. I go bananas trying to get through my own editing. I miss mistakes constantly. And then when I hand it over to the editor, I feel kind of a mixed wave of relief and grief. It's like it's out of my hands for now, but the next time I see it, it's going to be marked up. It's going to be brutal. It really drags me down, but it's so crucial. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's going to be just a terrible waste of time.
Yeah, no, it is always a case of like I don't know. I don't know if my view on editing has kind of changed to more sort of revel in the sea of red. Yeah. Just because I mean it's more the case of like it's living proof that the product is getting better.
That's true. And that is a good point.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's like the idea of like I enjoy flagellation. This the process of going through the yes, these are all the poorly worded sentences.
Right. I deserve this.
Yes. Passive voice.
Yeah.
No, 100%. And yeah, I think the kind of sometimes it is tempted to, once you kind of finish a thing, to just essentially just throw it off to an editor. Yeah. But I think that the painful process of at least giving it a one read over yourself, it hurts, but I mean,
it's necessary.
Yeah. No.
You know what? It's even a sign of respect to the editor. Like, you have to at least do your utmost to catch as many as you can before you send it to them, right? Because they're going to be spending hours on this thing. So yeah, it's definitely worth the time.
No, 100%. And yeah, no, I cannot echo enough how editors are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, interesting. And I guess so. Less on, I guess, more in a design sense. Then,
Yeah.
is there any sort of particular part of a project that you find maybe the most challenging?
The most challenging part of a project. Let's see. Yeah, I think when it comes to the problem-solving process of how are you going to bend these rules to match your vision?
Yeah.
You know, you have an idea of what combat should look like, or you have an idea of what, for example, three-dimensional combat should look like.
Yeah.
And then the question is, well, how do you do this in a way that isn't so cumbersome, that doesn't contradict other rules that already exist? You know, that's the kind of tough part of the design, I think, is, you know, making these really finite rules sing somehow and change the game. So.
Yeah, I think it's all because it kind of leans into like having an adventure be a sort of fresh and new experience. It always benefits from those sort of unique tweaks and rules.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, it kind of depends on kind of what sort of experience whether you're going for. Whether it again is that sort of like murder mystery that kind of you introduce a system to kind of better allow for players to go about their business and solve the murder, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Or yeah, as you said, like trying to make fighting in 3D space work without people constantly falling 100 feet.
Right, exactly.
And then I guess so on kind of building on from that. Then, is there any particular design choice that you've made then that you're kind of particularly proud of?
I mean, I do love the infernal mode, to be able to switch back and forth. I thought that was really cool. But one that I found in my first project was in Sorrow's Ruin, which is from the Chronicles of Sorrow. You do get a ring at the end of the adventure, and there's a level 1 adventure, right? But what happens is when you wear this ring, you can be telepathically contacted by a character. And they can summon you back. So it's a one-way teleportation ring. Ooh. So yeah, the reason it's cool is if it were a two-way teleportation ring, you could leave combat and come back and it could be really badly abused. But when you have a one-way teleportation, it can create real kind of a crisis, right? Like if you're about to die in combat, do you put on this teleportation ring and get out of there and leave your friends behind? You know, this is a matter of choice that the player will have now. But yeah, that I thought was really cool, and it was really well received by players. They were like, "Oh man, I love the idea that I could be at anywhere in Faerun, and I could get a summons back to my home base, and I can answer that summons. And the trick being, you can't go back where you were, right? But you know, if the DM wants to have that narrative choice and flexibility, there it is. So I really like that.
It's almost like a sort of like a hanging call to action that at any point you're just like, okay, well, things are getting a little bit dry and quiet. Let's yank one of the players out.
You got it. It's a bat symbol, right?
Yeah. No,
exactly.
Interesting. No, I do like those sort of those sort of kind of items that kind of serve a dual purpose.
Yes.
And yeah, the sort of having these sort of meaningful choices ready at the kind of the get-go of like, I don't really know where, so actually with this item, do you know exactly where you're going to end up? Or
you do.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's kind
you
of
always know where you're going to go.
Yeah. Kind of, or is it like connected to like almost like a magic circle? Or sorry, a teleportation circle? Or yeah. No, I'm trying to think if I've done any sort of similar items to that sense. My go-to is I do kind of like playing around with cursed items, but cursed in, again, not always in a bad sense. You know, the idea of like, you know, cursed with like a spirit, and now that kind of, you know, takes part in, or generally just playing around with sentient items. I think those are fun just because it kind of gives you, well, as a DM, it gives you an additional voice in the party, and sometimes that voice can be the voice of reason, which the party occasionally needs.
That's fair. Do you really want to do that?
Yeah, no. I don't know. The disembodied voice is saying it's not such a good idea.
Take it for what you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What does your sword know? No, interesting. And so I guess so aside from adventures, then have you kind of are you currently like dipping your toes into, or are you thinking about sort of any products kind of beyond the scope of adventures?
I am, finally, yes. I'm working with my writing partner, Chad. Yeah, you've met Chad, of course.
We spoke last week.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So we've just finally put this this project that we've been working on for 6 months to bed, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. I'm sure Chad mentioned a couple of the key details, but ultimately it is a way of putting templates onto monsters. So back in the 3.5 days, I'm sure you go back that far in the game. Templates were huge. You could put an advanced template on a goblin and it became more dangerous. Eventually, a whole book of templates came out from a third-party publisher, and it was extremely popular. It was called the Advanced Bestiary, I believe, and it was huge. It was huge. This carried on into Pathfinder as well, and it just kept doubling in size. It was an enormous volume by the time it was done. So, looking at the past history of templates, Chad and I said, is there a way to create our own original templates that adds a twist to combat? We just don't want to make tougher enemies. We want to make combat more interesting. Mm-hmm. And so what we did is we came up with a way of putting two versions of a template, a +1 and a +2 template. The +1 are just a bunch of, they're dangerous characters with their own new template powers. But the +2 guy is a boss who has a synergistic ability that can change the combat. Mm-hmm. So for example, one type of, the level 1 character or the type 1 character can use a hold person on a party member. But the boss, once that occurs, the boss can now teleport his minion with the character, and they go in a 30-foot radius of the boss's choice. And this is the kind of synergy that we wanted to do, to have this kind of, whoa, what's happening? A surprise for the players, right? So now that I'm away from adventures for a little bit, like I'm always interested in making combat unexpected, more interesting, adding a level of complexity. That's just something that always interests me. And so, yeah, this new one's called Monster Perks. I'm looking forward to it getting out there and seeing what people think.
No, 100%, because I think there is like, I've seen it kind of hopping about all over the place, that there is kind of like a school of design thought when it comes to monsters, that you kind of want to give them like one cool ability, right, and kind of make it that kind of like they're cool. And there are kind of like a number of monsters which don't necessarily have that cool of, they're just kind of bog standard. And any sort of systems in place to kind of bolster or kind of give you those cool sort of unexpected moments.
Right.
I think that is there any sort of particular like +1 ability that you kind of like have, again, is like a personal favorite?
Oh yeah. Okay. So I have one of my favorite +1 abilities is a way of putting in basically a group of illusion spells onto any creature. Okay. So that let's say, for example, I give a goblin.
Yeah.
Why not? We love them. You take a goblin and you say, okay, you now have access to these 3 conjuration or evocation spells. Now, they're partly illusion. Now, this goes back to the Shadowcaster from 3.5. So this little goblin can now cast an evocation spell that's mostly illusion. And if you can interact with the spell as a wisdom saving throw, you can get rid of most of the ill effects because it's not really there. It's partially there, right? Now, with that being said, the +2 boss in that case has a whole library of strictly illusion spells. And his or its being is, listen, now you have to roll with disadvantage against these illusions. Mm-hmm. And the +1 guys can see through those illusions. So this creates a dynamic battlefield where half the party might not be able to tell what's really in front of them.
Yeah.
But all the bad guys can.
Interesting. Yeah. I do like the idea of like this little goblin like holding above its head like a massive fireball.
Yes.
It's just entirely fake.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can save against it, all the power to you, right? So that's the trick.
No, interesting. Yeah. And again, it's interesting because it's instantly, if you think of like this goblin gang, essentially, of like illusionists, that in itself is like a running story hook of like, why are these goblins so obsessed with illusions? Like, how does their society or group like take shape if they can't trust anything being real?
That's right. Yeah, and that's a great point, because so every template has to have lore associated with it, and if like failing the lore, it's just a trick, right? So you have to, you make a really good point. You have to include the lore, or else it falls flat.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting. So I think one thing that I kind of probed Chad a little bit on then was like, how do you necessarily, like, obviously, is there any sense of balancing these, in the sense that, like, obviously take the illusion stuff.
Yes.
There are some monsters that if you were to give that sort of illusionary magic to and stuff like that, it may, well, maybe not. Again, I don't know if illusions are enough to tip any monster over into being, I don't know, maybe a gelatinous cube.
Sure.
That just puts like fake walls and doors all over the place that you just kind of walk through, and then you're in.
Absolutely, yeah. And no, that's great. That's great creative thought, right? So, the basic balancing mechanism, it works effectively like this: a +1 has to have a degree of defense and a degree of offense. Right now, what that degree is part math and part magic. Right? As a creator, you're like, okay, what do the good people of Dungeons and Dragons consider to be a +1 ability, and then the +2 is effectively just kind of a double amount of that, right? So it's kind of, like I said, it's math and magic putting these things together. Now, again, some creatures and combinations are going to be way more deadly than others, but that's where the DM comes in, right? That's where the DM can say, I'm using this to its full potential, because my players are incredibly cagey. They're the kind that have a 10-foot pole and they're walking down the dungeon, right? This could be a case where the illusion and a gelatinous cube just won't work on these guys, right? If, however, let's say you have a careless bunch of adventurers and it's time to maybe teach them a lesson, you can certainly get out a gelatinous cube and illusion, and they're like, what? I've got to be more careful. It's like, you sure do.
Yeah.
So it's fair.
They've ignored every warning from their sentient sword of like,
exactly.
Don't go in there. It's like that.
You got it.
Yeah.
So there are consequences, and the DM has that ability, right? It's just another tool.
I must admit, yeah. And I suppose it is a case of like when you are creating a supplemental product that is a bunch of optional rules.
Yes.
Again,
exactly.
it very much, you can offer guidance and kind of like, so this is kind of some suggested ways to use it, but ultimately it kind of falls to the DM to either be evil or not so.
That's right. You got to trust them, right? They ultimately the storyteller, so you give them the tool and you see what they do.
No, interesting. No, again, it sounds like an awesome product, and I always do kind of like hearing about the kind of products that kind of are adaptations from previous editions.
Yes.
Just because like you've seen it a whole bunch before with like the skill challenges being a sort of system that people kind of liked before. I know there's some people kind of tackling just kind of the skills in general and other. But no, I must admit I didn't really know about these sort of templates kind of before. I'm a 5th edition baby through and through. So
okay, there you go. Fair enough.
Then okay, well, interesting. So I guess moving more broadly again. Talk about again your kind of process as a whole. Then, is there any sort of particular lesson that you've learned over the course of just creating on the DMsGuild that you kind of wish you'd learned earlier?
Absolutely. I think when I was first starting, so I've only been in the game since July 2018, so I'm really new in a way. I was coming in blind. I had no idea. I had no mentorship initially. I wish I realized sooner how supportive the community was, right? I thought it was going to be a highly competitive environment where I had to keep my secrets very close to my vest, or else, someone would take it and run away with it. Yeah. And I realized people are not really interested in doing that, and they actually want to help you. So I wish earlier on in the process I had just known that the community was so positive. And once I did find out, it just changed everything. I didn't have to do everything myself. I could, as I gained experience, I could share my experience with people and, be the coach that I wished I had, and I'm very happy to say it didn't take me long to stumble into the community, and people just said, oh, I'll help you. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm taking it. I will definitely take your help. So yeah, I wish I knew earlier on, because I was struggling in obscurity for way too long.
As I say, yeah, we at the DMsGuild community, we're a pervasive bunch. No, I'm curious then. So, what would you say? Like, what was the tipping point then for you? Then was it just like a particular outreach, or?
I think it was, I just was going through the rules of the DM's Guild and I was like, oh gosh, can I do this? Like, I think I've got the basic rule here that I'm allowed to use this world. I'm not allowed to use this world, but who do I ask? So it's actually funny. I think when I went on Facebook, I typed in DM's Guild and a couple of communities popped up and I just joined one. And I just said, hi guys, sorry, first time I have this kind of weird question, but and I spouted off. I think it was about maps or something. I'm really not too sure. And someone says, oh yeah, of course, this is what you could do. And I'm like, oh gosh, they're so forthcoming. And so yeah, just that moment of not having the answer and knowing that I was not ever going to be satisfied that I had the legal answer I needed, whatever it might be. And they were there for me. So
yeah, I mean, it was this case of like you go through that like sort of like I guess I could email like the community team and hope for an answer and stuff like that. But right. Chances are, again, that there's with the number of products going out in the DM's Guild, someone's already just asked the same questions or struggled through it already. So it's kind of shared knowledge is. There's a saying in there somewhere about shared knowledge. It's shared knowledge is good. That's that's the takeaway I'm going to sort of run with.
Yeah, that's fair.
So no, and then I guess in sort of turning it back, and then as you kind of mentioned, like kind of I guess mentoring or kind of with newer people kind of coming in and having all the questions they kind of have. What would you say there's any singular piece of advice that you would kind of or you have been giving or you would give to people kind of fumbling their way through?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say most people in the DM's Guild that I've ever encountered want to support you. And so if you can take a baby step out and just say, I need a little advice, you're going to find people are tripping over themselves to give you the best possible advice. And I think maybe it's because D&D is a team game. It's not a game where one person wins at the end. It's a game where everybody wins or loses together. I think that kind of philosophy permeates the guild culture. And so when you say, I don't know, I find that an entire group of people come running to help you. So if there was a new creator out there, I'd say, please just reach out to the community and you're going to be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. And yeah, I think I do love using the sort of the D&D party composition as an analogy for putting together a DM's Guild product, because there's so many people out there who have different range of skill sets and when it all kind of comes together, you kind of feel like one of the more well-equipped adventuring parties.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, with the 10-foot poles, and less of the ignoring of sentient weapons. So. No, yeah. And then I guess, so you kind of mentioned that you're working on kind of monster perks at the moment.
Yes.
Is there any sort of project that you have at the moment that you would say is, or you're not working on at the moment, but you would say is undoubtedly like a dream project?
Yeah, right now, I would love to do something which is a location-based rule set. Now, I know that sounds weird. Yeah, so, okay, let me give you a little example. Most people have seen Star Trek, right? You know that when you watch a show, you see all the main characters, but you also see the ancillary characters, right, going about their business. So I would love to have game rules where the party stays still. The party stays in a fortress, and their job is to protect the people of the town. Their job is to go out into the wilderness and come back. And so it builds a relationship and a reputation between yourself and the people of that location. I think there's a whole demographic of newer players particularly who really like the character exploration side of the game. And the problem is when you are a typical adventuring party, it's plunge and move on, right? You kill and you're gone. So you don't get a chance to really know the people in the town. So I think there's tons of opportunity for having a group of adventurers be the defenders of this city, where they get to know the NPCs deeply and intimately. They get to know the people who they buy their equipment from isn't just, random guy who says, you look like adventurers, right? So it is to get away from the video game expectations that a lot of people have when they come in. It's like, oh yeah, the NPCs, they say a couple of one-liners, we roll a couple of dice, they disappear, I never see them again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, again, you kind of touched on like a really sort of interesting point that like, yeah, there are those campaigns that kind of again stem around a singular location.
Right.
And it's funny enough, like of like, I guess like I would say how it's kind of, you said it's kind of getting away from like the video game kind of expectations of going through like pillaging or through, but I would say having a base like almost like maintenance and stuff like that, you are kind of reintroducing certain gameplay loops and
Yes,
stuff
it's
like
true.
that. I think it is a kind of fantastic idea, because the number of people who kind of really enjoy those sort of base building games, or actually, I don't know. Have you played was it Hades?
No, never did.
So that is a kind of a recent game where essentially you play through a level again and again, a very sort of like roguelike, and as you kind of go through, you're collecting items to then build this base, make connections, like build relationships with people. Yeah, no, 100%. I think there definitely is kind of like a place for that. Is this something that you've had the chance to kind of explore, like during like a D&D session, or is this more sort of like, again, kind of, I would like that.
Well, it started with Sorrow's Ruin. What happens at the end of Sorrow's Ruin is, if you're lucky, you get to hang out in a destroyed old tower. Right, it's a complete mess. So there are rules on upkeep and maintenance, but as you level up, you can start improving your tower. Right, and this having your magical ring that brings you back to your headquarters is built into this sort of design, right? So it's something that I am kind of working with, but the social side of it, like a reputation rule set, where it isn't just a persuasion check. Oh yeah, well he agrees with you because you rolled well. Having a point system based on your reputation that can aid you in rolls later. But the DM would keep track of for plot points, larger meta arcs, where people will say, you know what, we need a hero. You're the right person based on your reputation, right? So building a reputation rule set, I think, would be really, really cool.
I mean, it's something that D&D have kind of tried to tackle before with like their sort of renown system for factions.
Yes.
But again, it kind of feels, again, the sort of, at least I found with Waterdeep Dragon Heist, it was more the case of like, oh, you do a mission for them, you get kind of like 1 point.
Exactly.
And yeah, no, it would be really interesting to sort of see that, like, obviously there would be the big scale events where like, if your castle is under siege, saving it from a siege would probably boost reputation with nearly everybody.
Exactly.
But the sort of smaller sort of like, I don't know, let's say the blacksmith is just like, I really want to build. I'm gonna keep calling it. I want to build a sentient weapon.
Yes. Why not?
Yeah, I need some things in order to do that, and also you go out your way and yeah, kind of returning to this location and helping people kind of achieve their goals.
That's right, yeah. And interestingly, I mean, when there's the other side of it, which is there's someone in town who's angry that you've done a particular thing. So unbeknownst to you, but the DM knows, there's a negative reputation happening where someone is deathly jealous of you. And every time you succeed, they just want revenge.
Yeah.
And so, you can have these hidden plot arcs that the players are in some ways totally out of the loop of, but their actions have direct influence on. Right, so I would love to see something like that. I think it'd be a really cool, a cool new system.
Yeah, no, again, I think I guess the balance is trying to make you that not so unyieldy for the DM, and
Yes,
again,
yeah.
just having like not even like a spreadsheet, but just like a piece of paper where you can just keep mark of like renown changes.
Yes.
Reputation changes.
Yeah.
But no, I do love the idea of like as the players get more and more successful, there's like 2 or 3 like curmudgeons who are just like,
Them again?
yeah. Or again, this goes back to something that I've said a few times is I want there to be more rival adventuring parties out there.
Yeah.
And just having 2 adventuring parties within one town just feels like that is the perfect playground for shenanigans. It's not the case where that like the one group does so good that the other one turns evil.
Right.
It's more the case of like, they're just like, they're sort of like generally occasionally like spreading rumors or just generally being nuisances that not every interaction with an NPC needs to be, oh, this person's a friend, or I need to kill this person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, change it up a bit.
Yeah, no, interesting. And yeah, no, I do love as well that you've kind of like with your is it the Chronicles of Ruin?
Yeah, this, what is it? Oh gosh, the Sorrow's Ruin, the Chronicles of Sorrow. I know it's a mouthful.
Sorry. So with that, yeah, you almost like I love how you kind of set yourself up for a supplemental product to be like, oh,
Yes.
here's how you would operate a kind of base running and stuff like that. But if you
Yep.
want a little bit more guidance,
Yeah, absolutely.
no, interesting. Then okay, cool. So other than that, then I guess is there are there any more sort of I guess adventures on the horizon?
Yeah, right now I've got part 4 of Shipwrecked, which I didn't expect to do. It just people seem to really enjoy the solo adventure, and I'm like, okay, hey, if you're telling me I should make part 4, I'm gonna make part 4. So that one I'm really happy about. It's a bit of a change for me because it's more it's a little less linear. It keeps the narrative style, but there are more and more choices as I'm getting more skilled at this particular style. And I'm also going to be using that dynamic battlefield for the solo adventures. So my hope is that this is going to be kind of a perfect storm where some of my long-term players who have played all 3 are going to get a pleasant surprise in part 4. So that's that, and the solitaire class. Those 2 things are really near completion, and I'm excited to see how people take to them.
So I'm slightly curious then. So how did you like? I guess what is I guess. Is I imagine there is a continuous plot between the Shipwreck series.
There are, yeah.
Okay, fine. So I guess I'm curious. Like, is how long do you think you're going to keep going with sort of like sequels and stuff like that? Or do you think?
Funny. I honestly, as long as people keep enjoying them, they are not the hardest things to write. Like the monster perks was, like I said, and as Chad reiterated, 6 months of, algebra. It was brutal.
Yeah.
And then finally, when it was done, I mean, I'm glad it's a nice product. But a solo adventure, you can write if you have a passion and an idea. You can write them fairly quickly. Yeah. So I would love to go to level 20. I would absolutely, if people still enjoy it, and I had a retention rate that warranted it, I would definitely go to level 20.
Yeah, I mentioned they lend themselves to like 1 per level.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
And I guess again, you don't necessarily have the sort of like the same constraints to be like, okay, well, the gap between level 19 to 20 needs to be an adventure of this long.
Right, exactly.
Because again, in a solo adventure, you can sort of essentially hand wave some of these like long periods of time or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely. You just what do they call it? It's a milestone, right? Yeah. When you complete level 19, you milestone up to level 20, done.
Interesting. And then I guess how have you kind of found sort of again, do you still kind of think you have like adequate callbacks to like the previous ventures, or do you try your best to try and keep each one rather insular? Or
good point. It's funny. I think that most of them there's a callback, but it is a complete quest. Mm-hmm. So when you do Shipwrecked Part 1, you're satisfied with the ending. When you do Shipwrecked Part 2, you've succeeded. And if you've never played Shipwrecked Part 3, you're still happy. You've done your part. But the thread running through them is definitely there. That plot continues to develop. So, it was finished in Part 3, but now I'm doing Part 4 and I'm starting a new arc. So I'm hinting at what's going to eventually happen. I think I'll go up to level 8 with this particular arc, maybe level 7. So I can see 4 more of these being written for this arc.
It's interesting as well because I suppose as you especially get higher up in the sort of the levels and stuff like that, again the threats you're dealing with kind of become more and more almost existential.
Yes.
And then that's kind of gives you the opportunity to be like, oh look, it turns out there was a god involved the whole time. Oh,
Yeah, exactly. Behind the curtain. Yeah, exactly.
No, interesting. No, again, I honestly I think, for my sake, I'm really tempted to try and write a kind of like solo adventure, just because, again, it feels like it flexes some different design muscles.
Yes, it does, and way more problems than you like. Definitely do it because when you run into those problems, it's really interesting. Like I said, I lose a little bit of sleep where I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going to happen here? But it's so satisfying when you come up with a cool idea.
So. Here's a bit of a question then. So has there been anything in writing solo adventures that has helped you write more traditional adventures?
Yeah, definitely. The necessity for the dynamic battlefield, right? that I encountered with solo adventures is something that I could definitely see carrying over to my next adventure, where we give players options on the battlefield by interacting with the environment in an unusual way, right? Where there's instead of having to say, okay, well, there's a tapestry on the wall. Okay, well, what should we do? Is it going to be a dexterity check? Just build those into the combat. And have those theatrical moments pre-planned, so that the DM has those at their fingertips, right?
And I suppose one thing that we didn't really touch on is this fact that like it's nice to kind of include these moments for the players to use, but as a DM, if the players aren't making the most of them, have the enemies do it.
Absolutely,
it's
absolutely, and it changes everything, because it isn't just suddenly your turn fireball, your turn healing word, your turn sword, right? Suddenly it becomes this, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Larry's buried under the tapestry, right? And the orcs are standing on it. What are we going to do? It just changes everything, right? So it's worth it. It just makes the combat more complicated.
That sounds like a bad day for Larry. Well,
what do you do?
It's dangers in the line of work.
That's right.
So no, fantastic. Then I kind of guess, like, you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier about just engaging with the community and how kind of supportive they were. Is there who are some of the people in the community that kind of continually inspires you?
Well, I'm going to say Ashley Warren. Her work is awesome, and having seen and played The Executioner's Daughter, it really just changed the way I thought about writing. So that was really inspiring. The two big writers in solo are Randall Wright and Paul Bimler. They are outstanding. They build a story into a solo game like I've never seen before. They're not only good game designers, they're excellent writers. So it feels like you're playing in a novel, right? It's just fabulous. I'd also say the team that put out the disease, the whole disease category, I think it was Jason Bakos and his team.
The malady.
The malady. That's right. The malady work. That was all top shelf stuff. I have to give a shout out to my writing partner, Chad. He did the Bard School of Percussion. Which, I looked at it, and its depth is just staggering. He took one idea and just went as far deep down as you can. And, it's what they say is like, it's 1 inch wide, but it's 1 mile deep, and it's just fabulous.
It's funny that exact saying came up while we were chatting. That's kind of how he describes that product, is the fact that it's 1 inch wide, but like 1 mile deep.
Yeah, that's exactly how I'd call it too. Yeah, bang on. Well, he and I chat so much, we must be like, we have to go 1 inch wide, 1 mile deep. Yeah, that's fair.
No, it's funny. It's like a real life example of how working and collaborating with someone, how you just naturally rub off, and those sort of sentences, or like shared.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's funny, because he's American and I'm Canadian, so we do have these moments where we use different slang, and now I'm picking up American slang and he's picking up Canadian slang, so it's pretty funny.
Yeah, no, I think, what is it? Being from England and working with my fair share of like Americans, every time I use a you in a word where it doesn't belong, I feel, but it's what can I say? Again, dangers in the line of work. That's me underneath the tapestry.
Yeah, well, that I'm right there with you, man. We use the same use over here.
Yeah,
it drives the American editors crazy. It's true.
So, I mean, what was it? Well, Blaise, we have managed to kind of natural way an hour, really.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, time always flies.
It does.
And in fairness, we've touched on it a fair bit and stuff like that, of like some of the interesting stuff that you've kind of got coming out on the horizon. But if you want to give a quick summary of like some of the stuff that you're working on, and kind of more importantly, where's the best place for people to stay up to date and hear about, when all these exciting products are coming out?
Sure. Okay. So the product that's really coming out now in February is Monster Perks. It's a beautiful thing. Being able to play with monsters in a way you've never played before. So I'm really proud of that work. I'm looking forward to it coming out. And the best way to get in touch with me is you can go onto Facebook, and it's Nimbus of Legend Games. And failing that, if you don't have Facebook, you can find me on Twitter at Nimbus of. So that's the best way.
Yeah, no, like I said, I'll make sure we throw a link to the Facebook group somewhere in the description.
Cool,
That way people can find you and stuff like that. But yeah, I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. Things are coming out soon. Yeah, I've got some things. Again, I don't want to preempt anything. But I think one of these days is because of when I record these episodes. Sometimes I'm hesitant to say when I have stuff coming out.
Fair. Yeah.
So I may start adding like little things on the end of each episode as and when things are announced, or just I'll figure something out.
That sounds good.
But either way, again, Blaise, thank you so much for taking some time to sit down and have this chit chat. It's been delightful.
Yep, likewise. Thank you so much.
My very final question then is how do you end a podcast?
I end a podcast by thanking the people who made it happen. So thank you so much, Matt. And I want to also say big thanks to the DMsGuild community, and all the people I mentioned have been really inspirational. So my sincere thanks.
Thank you, me.